Hello, lovely humans. Welcome back to the We Are Already Free podcast. Many of us in this life carry blocks that keep us stuck, patterns that we can't seem to shake, no matter how hard we try. And these invisible chains often trace back to our earliest moments, to our birth story. Birth is the first experience that we have of an embodied life, and it's so critical, and yet in our society, it's so overlooked and mistreated. And so this thing that has such a powerful impact on us can shape our life, our business, our relationships. Without understanding this part of our lives, we will keep hitting the same walls, the same blocks. So in today's episode, you will learn how your birth story holds a powerful key to your liberation and discover some practical ways to start healing your birth imprints. And we're going to have the incredible support of Nicole Moore, who is a Senior Facilitator of Birth into Being, to guide us on this path today, to support us with her own stories and her own journey. And she is someone who trains practitioners internationally. She focuses her work on the imprints of birth and early life and their impacts on our capacity to thrive. Her clients birth and build sustainable businesses that heal and elevate the planet in a large range of interpersonal service industries. These include counselors, coaches, birth workers, body workers, psychologists, support workers, and those working within the healing arts and complementary therapies. She also hosts transformational deep immersion workshops internationally and speaks to industry groups about the impacts of birth and early life experiences on human development and potential. So as I am sure you can imagine, we have a very beautiful conversation ahead of us today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining me for We Are Already Free. When you hear the words, we are already free, what comes up for you?
Acceptance.
Change.
A shift in awareness.
Human beings are so powerful.
There's so much more.
Everything is love behind it.
Breaking the chains of your own mind. That which remains.
Nature.
Getting out of the matrix.
We're sitting on the treasure and it's already unlocked.
We are already free.
You're free.
You are a walking map.
I've always been free.
You are always free, already free.
We are already free.
Hello and welcome to We Are Already Free. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us, Nicole.
My pleasure. I look forward to chatting with you.
So I'm always curious as we get into these conversations to hear about your own journey, your own experience of really getting into this. Like, what is it that inspired you? Have you always had this kind of interest in birth as this holy, sacred process? Or was there something that you had to go through that enabled you to step into this space of service and knowledge and awareness in this way?
I do remember watching documentaries as a teenager and trying to comprehend the magic of birth. But it wasn't until I was pregnant myself that I kind of my whole worldview kind of expanded to include birth. And yeah, it was just such a complete exploration in that first pregnancy and then in a different way in the second. And yeah, that was 22 years ago now. 23 actually, because my firstborn is 22. And yeah, so it was through my own journey, and I just was so fortunate to have landed in a part of the world where home birth was very openly encouraged and completely normalized. And so I was just easily set upon the path of having a home birth, which also means that it's probably going to be unmedicated and purely physiological birth as opposed to surgical or whatever. So yeah, it was through my own journey, and yeah, and it was a very deep immersion actually, and I'm still in it, but in a very different way because I'm 50 now. So
Right.
My contemporaries are no longer having birth babies. So very few of them are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for a little more context from myself, because there's a few things, I think I said to you before we went live that this is very personal for me. And also my hope is that this can be inspiring and expansive and empowering for anyone listening. But this isn't something I'm generally sharing super publicly out there. But my wife is pregnant, and we are having our first child sometime in April, and we're going home birth. We have a beautiful midwife. We're going more free birth, in fact. And so we actually watched the documentary. What is the name of the document? Is it Birth into Being, or what is
Birth
the document?
as We Know It.
Birth as We Know It. And we watched it together before she was pregnant, before we were even married. And it just landed so deeply for me. So I really do encourage anyone, I'll be sure to put that in the show notes, like watch that documentary for a real deep invite and expansion into what birth can really be. And at the same time, for many listening right now, they might be going like, what is this all about? Like, everyone's birthing, we've got hospitals, we've got doctors, like what are you guys talking about? Why does any of this matter? So could you help us to understand a little more of why birth is so important? What does birth really mean? What can birth mean? And what's going on in our society today around birth?
Those are all just enormous questions. So
I'm sorry. Take whichever one and we'll come back to the others.
Yeah. Look, it is a little bit like some kind of secret initiated knowledge that birth is sacred and that birth can be absolutely magical and transformative. And unfortunately, not everybody comes across this information before having a baby. Some people find it out just by chance in the birth of their child, and that's a beautiful thing. But, the numbers are growing. I mean, Instagram is very helpful in that way, that the word is spreading for better and worse. Like, there's also lots of, it's a very nuanced conversation there. But it's wonderful. It's wonderful that people can still access the ancient knowledge that we used for centuries and centuries to bring our babies into the world, and that we can also enhance this with modern knowledge of what we now understand about the nervous system and how the nervous system develops and everything, so that we can really optimize the pregnancy and the birth for the baby's nervous system and well-being, so that we can understand that getting good rest, for example, it's not just about the rest and everything. It's also about the nervous system and the mother keeping herself really chilled so that the baby can be chilled, and so that the baby's actual blueprint for life is one of being safe and grounded and calm and resilient to handle life's ups and downs, so that when, for example, the pregnant mama experiences the normal ups and downs of life, or even dramatic events, and I said dramatic, but I'll also add traumatic to that, where if the mother is grounded in other ways, then she can be resilient to these ups and downs, can communicate all of that to the baby, let the baby know that, yep, that was rough, that car accident or this big wave of grief or whatever, but, mama's got it. This is not about you. It's not your fault. Then, we can basically optimize the growth of the baby's nervous system for an enhanced sense of safety in the world. And given the enormous task ahead of our future generations, I just feel like it's quite urgent, actually, that we give them that absolute full toolbox in terms of how to feel safe in the world and relate to one another from a place of safety and everything, because there is just such a big task ahead of our future generations, and it's getting bigger by the moment. So we really need to use every single tool that we have to optimize the experience of coming to life for our future generations, because these moments, the development of the neural pathways that happen in conception, gestation, and birth, and the early years of childhood, this is what is creating that person's ability to be in the world. And when we think about that across society and as a species, this is what we need to be able to like just get over ourselves and get on with the jobs at hand, which is, of course, turning our trajectory around.
Well said. And I'm curious to know around the general, because often we look at extremes in many situations, and often with birth, people will say, oh, well, if you home birth, then this terrible thing can happen, or if you hospital birth, then this wonderful or terrible thing can happen, etc. And I'm wondering, if you think of the general experience, and again, based around this idea of this nervous system that is designed to be able to navigate reality in a way that is functional, regenerative, that is resilient, what is your perspective on the general experience that someone, a mother and a baby, might have in hospital, and what they might generally experience in something like a home birth? Again, knowing that there are extremes of both of those, but like, what's the difference there as a generalization?
Well, really personalized care. So like if a woman is journeying with a home birth midwife throughout her pregnancy, and she's seeing generally that one midwife, maybe like in Australia, they currently have some legalities around working in pairs. So the second midwife, who they might see less often, maybe they have a doula as well, but they will have continuity of care with a very small team. In the hospital system, their care will be possibly spread out amongst a group. It all depends. All hospitals are different. I live in a rural area, so people do have some degree of continuity of care with their midwives, but that's in a rural area. And even then, I think the appointments are 15 minutes each. And I know that's really disappointing and hard for the midwives that I know that work inside the system, that always kind of wish that they had more scope for care. I mean, that's why they got into that industry in the first place, most of them. So that's one big difference, is the level of or the types of care, the models of care that they will receive. In general, in the hospital, a pregnant mama and couple will be interfacing with a lot more people, and there's a kind of a higher risk factor because there's just more going on in a bigger environment than in a home environment where you have an element of control over your environment. Like you can decide to have other people there if you want or not. Yeah. And generally the ability to infuse your birth space with your own energy, really. Like at home, that's just a given. And in hospital, I know a lot of hospitals have the capacity for you to bring stuff to the birthing suite and stuff like that these days. Not in South India. I was just recently in South India, and I was in the labour ward. What an interesting slip. The labour room. I was kept trying to say womb, the labour womb. It was so unwomb-like. It was stainless steel. There was this stainless steel bench for the woman to give birth on. It was so horrific that I couldn't even bring myself to sneak a photo. Anyway, but hospitals in the West at least have the capacity for you to bring your own stuff. So you can, I think you have to have electric candles, but you can have stuff, music. You can bring some of your own energy in. But so that's one thing. And because of the nature of birth being such a limbically oriented experience, like all really centered around safety and everything, for a woman to feel truly safe to completely let go and be herself and bring that baby through however she needs to, having your own energy in a space is a really important factor. It really is, because that will speak to your limbic system, what you smell in the room, the surfaces that you touch, using your own pillow, like
Right.
your own pillow. So it will speak to your brain in such a way. So so there's a few ways in which the two experiences could be compared. And really, it's also about like interfacing with who you want in your birth space, because that's another thing that is going to really speak to your limbic system, is who's there. And in a hospital, that's just more difficult to control. In the home environment, it's quite simple for you to have clear boundaries around who's there and who's not.
Yeah, there's a beautiful story I've heard recently that you might resonate with, or maybe you know the story already. There's a woman named Ruth who is a midwife here in South Africa, a phenomenal woman. And she tells the story of how elephants birth. And she says where the females will all stand around the birthing mother and they will face outward. They'll create a circle around her and they'll face outward. So she has privacy and she has safety, and she knows that she can just focus completely on her own experience. And there's something like that's actually what humans also need, is that sense of secure. There's a circle of safety around her and she can drop into whatever she needs to drop into to be able to surrender into this experience. As you say, go into that limbic state, that altered state that allows the transition to unfold as it's intended. And so I love that image. It's really very impactful for me when I first read that.
Absolutely. And another analogy that can be easily applied is that the same energy of the lovemaking that created the baby can be present in the birth suite, and then it just becomes part of the act of love. That you made love and 9 months later, there you are again, making love while this baby comes out. And I don't, I just mean in that same vibe, in that same energy of bringing this life through. Birth experiences at home can be absolutely transcendental spiritual experiences. But, for that to take place, for that kind of heart-opening expansion, or this kind of like truly, truly mystical experience to occur, you have to protect the environment.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm just speaking about imprints because, as it says in your bio, that is a very interesting piece to me. And I'll give a little story of my own for context. And I'm not well versed in this, so you could tell me if I'm off the mark here. But I recently discovered that my mom, and there's multiple layers to this, and my parents my parents birthed all their children at home with a midwife, and amazing. And I was the firstborn, and it was taking a time that they thought was longer, and my mom was tired. And so there were two things that happened. One is that my dad went down to the only phone in the village at the time, and he called the local prayer group, and he said, "Look, this, like, Karen's tired. We kind of need support, and could you guys all pray and support this energy in moving?" So that was the one part. And the other part, which I thought was interesting, is that they ended up giving her a bit of pitocin. So one of the aids for helping birth to happen faster, or to happen in the way that, so the midwife isn't overly concerned and like, well, then we're going to need to go to hospital because this is taking too long, all those things. And when my mom told me that, and she was telling me it a few years ago, and she said, "Look, I just want to apologize. I don't think we needed the pitocin. I think you were on your way and you were just taking the time you needed." And what it landed for me personally was that I have felt for pretty much my entire life like I'm too late, that I am just behind time, like that I just am not quite getting it at exactly the right time. And actually there was a kid's story, a kid's book when I was very young called Leo the Late Bloomer. And that's like one of the only kids' books that I remember from my childhood, was feeling such a resonance with this Leo, I think he was like a leopard or a tiger or something, who just like wasn't getting on with life at the pace he was meant to. And so I relate that to my birth story of like, I was taking the time I needed. And then someone came along and said, no, you need to move along, son. Like, we've got to get this thing done. And that left this imprint of this feeling of lateness. And I'm wondering, is that accurate? Is that what you're talking about? Or could you speak to what that imprinting looks like or can look like?
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting that you've chosen that story to share, because I also have a funny relationship with time that is related to my birth. And to be fair, I'm not very consistent with it, but I do have moments of my life where I'm really trying to actively work with this imprint. And as yet, it keeps coming around. And like I said, I have not been consistent. I think there's many subtle layers to it. So I'll explain through both our stories how it can work. I'm curious about the part. First of all, I'm curious about the part where you and your mother were actually having this conversation. And I'm wondering, did she spontaneously bring this apology? What's the context of the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, my mom is a very introspective, very deep feeling and thinking human, and she's also deeply involved in birth as a passion of hers, like something that she really cares about, and having birth for children at home. And then at some point, I imagine, she never really told me the context of why it came up in that moment, and I actually will ask her after this, but I imagine that in her own journey of understanding more about birth and more about home births, and then even further home births that become medicated to whatever extent for whatever reason, we were just in a conversation. She's like, look, I just have something I want to say to you, which is that I realized this happened, and I just think it had an impact on you, and I just want to apologize. So that was the context.
Interesting. And when she says it had an impact on you, was she talking about the same thing that you're talking about, or she meant more like when you were a baby?
That's a great question. I must actually ask her that, because I'm not sure what her feeling around it was. I mean, I have had a lot of challenges in my life, but not like I think most people I know have. But I've struggled a lot with insecurity, with self-sabotage, depression, all those wonderful fun aspects of the human expression. So yeah, I'm going to ask her that. It's such good questions. Thank you.
Yeah. So look, the way it goes is that we can narrow down on any particular aspect of conception, gestation, birth, even preconception. There is a lot of very, very interesting work that's been done around the preconception experience. Then there's also like conception and implantation. You know, when the body says yes. Then there's the human beings involved. When they say yes, what is that first welcome like? Is it a welcome? And these are just points in the journey. Like, there are many parents that go into shock when they first discover that they're pregnant. Like, they didn't know how, it happened or anything. But they go into shock and they sort of have a moment of, so this is not like, I am not saying these things so that people start whipping themselves for all their moments of uncertainty. Not at all. There are many, many parents who have that shock and then go on to love and dedicate themselves to their children and raise beautiful humans. So it's not about that, but it's about knowing for yourself. And different things will resonate with different people. Like, some people know about their past and their birth experiences, what was happening for their mum while they were pregnant, and some people don't, and they have no way of finding out. So, and that is always a question that comes up with this work. So I try to mention it, that it's also just as resourceful to really allow yourself to feel, which part of the journey resonates with you, what is sitting there in your own feeling memory bank, like what is there for you around those concepts of implantation, first welcome, gestation, the different stages of gestation. And like, things happen, like people undergo like enormous loss and things like that while they're pregnant, and they go on. I mean, look at what happens all around the world. There are people going through enormous catastrophes and still having babies. Then there's the preparation for birth and the birth anticipation, because especially at least in the Western world, there is a lot of anticipation around the birth. So it's almost like that's a period of time in itself of what that relationship to the future is. how does that impact the baby? Is it fear-oriented? It's also very, very interesting in that case to look at birth order. First child, fifth child, first child after loss is a big one. You know, how the conception has gone. Like, okay, this is a viable conception that has this baby is going on, but is it after 5 losses? Is this a naturally conceived child, or has it happened through IVF? It's all these different stages of things. And again, it's not for better or worse. It's for just knowing what stages of your becoming feel tender to you. And it's like that phrase that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Well, so is trauma, you know? And I'm not saying that we need to label anything on that. Like, you can still have very informative experiences without them being considered traumatic along that conception, gestation, birth line. And then there's the early years. And then we have things like how our parenting styles have evolved and continue to evolve. And this is part of the progression of humanity. Thank the goodness that we are evolving in some ways. But what that means is that sometimes we are trying to parent in ways that we weren't parented. You know, the same way as we sometimes want to give birth, the way that we weren't born. And that's often the case when people are coming to this work. It's because they know that there's some terrible story around their early life, and it scares them carrying that forward. They don't want to carry it forward. They want to leave it in the past and move on and be able to bring their own babies in a different way. And hooray for those people that find that pathway to knowledge and understanding and basically find us and do work with us around limbic imprints. But likewise, when it comes to the early parenting stages and how triggering of our own inner child our children can be, that's something. That's really something. It's like, it's all well and good to prepare for birth, but you've got to prepare for parenting as well.
Absolutely.
And
definitely.
parenting involves some serious triggers.
Yeah. That's so I think that's one of the things that inspires me actually to keep getting up in the morning and like taking care of myself, to do my somatic practices and to pray and to breathe and move my body and like all those things, because I know that I know that I can't possibly know what the experiences that I'm about to step into, like that it's beyond my ken. I don't have the context for it. And I also know that it's going to push every boundary, every part that everything, every test that of every part of myself. And so wanting to just give myself and my child and my wife the best opportunity to experience the best of me. And also within that, the grace of mistakes of like, I'm going to get this so messed up sometimes. Like, and that's also just like unavoidable, and to be kind with myself first around all of that. So yeah, I feel it deeply.
Yeah, well, parenting is incredibly humbling, that is for sure. And the other thing that I want to say is that, yeah, well, enjoy all of that, your practices, everything that you mentioned. I get as much of it in as you can now, because on a very practical level, life is about to change. And I also wanted to say, but not as doom and gloom. Parenting, I mean, pregnancy and birth, but also parenting is like the ultimate spiritual adventure. You are venturing into the great mystery, and it is wonderful, wonderful journey. And I also want to say congratulations. I didn't get to say that before when you first mentioned it. So congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's very exciting.
Yeah. I actually had a quote that I discovered. I was thinking about Khalil Gibran, who I just generally think is a wonderful messenger. And I found a very short quote that he says, "Birth and death are the two noblest expressions of bravery. Birth and death are the two noblest expressions of bravery." And I just thought that was a nice reminder of the magnitude and the beauty of of the kind of courage that it takes to step into these transformative moments. And I'd be curious to hear, just because I'm sure you've had so many stories, and with honoring privacy, honoring all the boundaries in place, is there anything that you could share of a shift that you have witnessed in someone when they have understood their own imprint, their own birth story, and have, however they needed to, kind of made peace with that or resolved that or come into a different relationship with that, and how that's impacted their actual life, like what that's looked like?
Well, there's numerous books that have been written, big projects completed, including one of mine. Yeah, people stepping into their own is a really common experience, like stepping into their own selves and just being really unapologetic about who they are and what they came here to do and getting on with it. That is the number one experience. And sometimes it's amazing because, it just manifests in so many different ways. It's really amazing. And sometimes it's like someone will come and do like a long retreat with us and get all juiced up and then do the facilitator training and then go and do something completely different with their lives and with themselves, but like on full fire. It's absolutely amazing. And then there's other people that have been wanting to do a particular thing for a very long period of time. It's like their little pet dream, and it stays. This is my pet rock. No, I just realized it came up into camera. I play with it while I'm on.
That's awesome.
Camera. I play with it. It's very grounding and, But seeing as it came up, I thought, I better introduce my pet rock.
Rock and roll.
But no, people have their little pet dream that it's like they just drag that dream around with them everywhere they go and never bring it into reality. And it's like, it's a very dominant story in our culture, the dream that you drag around, but there's no reason that it can't happen. Once you kind of get rid of what we call it the debris of the past, which is just this flotsam and jetsam, old wounds, random shit that comes back up again and again, and you meet the same limitation or the same story with different characters again and again. And the general experience of when people kind of really come to understand and work with their limbic imprint and basically create new ones for their nervous system to adhere to, the basic big outcome is that they do what they came here for.
Just that old thing.
And that's really, and that's really cool. Like, absolutely beautiful to watch people getting out of their own way and doing their thing and like turning on, like all cylinders firing. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I feel that. It feels so beautiful to hear you talk about it. And of course, I highly recommend that anyone listening to this goes to the links that I will share in the show notes and follow your work and get into your work, take some of the workshops, the courses, or dive in. And also for someone who kind of just wants to take a step or maybe a single practice away with them from today, is there some like tiny thing that someone could do after this call that would just be a step in that direction? That would be something of honoring that desire for themselves.
Yeah. Well, so one thing that we haven't talked about yet, but the work that I do with the Birth into Being method is kind of a combination of different techniques, but some of them are kind of neurological hacks, and this is one of them. And we use it before we go into processes. We use it when we need a kind of like a recalibration. So it's kind of fun, and we don't have to wait until the end of the call. We can do it right now together.
Oh, amazing. I'm excited.
Yeah. So people can do it standing up and have it be like a whole body experience. I'm just going to stay on my chair. But it basically looks like this. Rapid rapid breathing and rapid facial movement. Bit of a hara breath at the end. And the idea is that when you scramble your facial muscles, you are scrambling your neurobiology and allowing a kind of a recalibration effect of just basically a little gap in your thinking that we jump behind and then go into either a process or if we're doing it purely for recalibration, maybe we were getting a bit stressed or flustered and we can just kind of do that and then give ourselves a couple of deep breaths or deep hara breaths, as I said, just below your belly button into your energy center, and use that kind of the contrast between the facial scrambling, the breath, and the stillness to kind of just create a little bit of space, a bit of a quiet moment for yourself to kind of choose something new if you're getting a bit tight or to allow a fresh idea. Like, so for example, when you're stuck in decision making and you are like, give me something new instead of just going over and over the same stuff. Can be good when you're interacting with somebody and you need to kind of recalibrate the conversation if they're up for it. It's great with kids. Really good fun with kids. Like when it's all getting a bit stressy, you can just do a little bit of what we call monkey breath. And it's a little reset. And this is a very simple tool. And it might be a bit misleading because it's kind of simple, but we use it, like I said, in workshops as a kind of an entry point to some of the more profound experiences that we offer. But yeah, it's fun, it's light, it offers space, and it's just a funky little tool.
That was completely unexpected, and I enjoyed that so much. And we actually have someone watching live who said, does laughter at what I see count? And I think she really enjoyed what just unfolded. And I really enjoyed it. And it definitely, I noticed the difference going into that state of kind of chaos in a way of just releasing, allowing chaos to come through, and playfulness actually, and silliness and ridiculousness, the jester. And then bringing it back into a slow, calm breath immediately. As you were talking, I was like, that's what I was experiencing, was that contrast between those two states, and just a really beautiful navigation. And actually, I know you say it is a super simple and an introduction into often much deeper work. And also, like, I'm finding that the somatic practices that are most impactful for me right now are very, very simple. And they just go so deep. And it's like, in a way, it's a medicine for me, where I've often felt like I had to go hard and go all in and be intense. And it has to be like, I have to feel like I'm literally about to die, and then I'm going to change. Then it's going to be better. And actually those softer, gentler, flowy, and in this case, silly practices are also doorways into this state of presence and enoughness and contentment. So thank you so much. We have obviously only scratched the tiniest surface here, and I want to take us into our Q&A session. We do have a question from someone, but I'm just wondering from you, is there anything else that's really feels important to you that you haven't said yet, that I haven't asked about, that you would just love to bring into this space in this moment?
So in the beginning, you asked a bunch of questions, and I kind of quickly forgot the questions as I started to answer. But anyway, it was all on the same general themes. But one of the questions I remember was like, what is happening with birth right now? And I don't want to talk about exactly what is happening with birth right now, because there's still a long way to go. But what I do want to say is that birth is a very, very important portal to, what it is to be human. And that's why it's so important that we continue to have contact with physiological birth, and why we continue to have contact with the hormonal journey as nature intended it to be, because that journey like completely supports us in our humanity. And by that, I mean our humanity, our capacity to be relational and to be human together, and to live a life of like interconnection and love. And because that's where I'm invested in us going as a species, that's why I'm so passionate about birth and so invested in sharing this message and everything, that birth is really important, is because it's like we're going to some strange places as a species, and we need to keep in contact with physiological birth.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And yeah, it's one of the things I'm still practicing, is asking one question at a time. So thank you for the reminder of that. I love that. And so, yeah, if anyone is watching now live and has questions, but otherwise we have one question that is asked by the Inscension, the Cosmic Scribe, has asked for any insights that you have, Nicole, around C-section, anything that you feel available to share around that.
Yeah, that's a really common question, because C-sections are really common. And so when people hear about the impact of birth and if they were born by a C-section, it's very natural to wonder. Or also when your own child was born that way. So, yeah, it's not a given that a C-section is a negative imprint for the child, because some C-sections happen as a result of the birthing mother needing help. And then there's also a lot of C-sections that don't happen that way. They are scheduled, or they're a result of interventions in the hospital system, that kind of thing. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot more income involved for when there's C-sections involved. So that's something to consider as well. Yeah, so it's not a given that it's a negative imprint, because it can come as an imprint of help comes when help is needed. And that is a wonderful imprint, because imagine the sense of safety that you get knowing that help comes when help is needed. That's cool, actually. I do know that the recovery journey for a mother that has a C-section is slightly different than a vaginal birth. It's a substantial wound. And so when a mother's womb is cut open, there's, I think, 6 or 7 layers of different types of tissue that are cut through. So that is a substantial wound. And so that has an impact on what she can physically do in the, I think, 6 weeks is the period of time that they talk about. And that's a bit of a shame, because there's a lot of holding and bonding and breastfeeding that goes on in that time. A factor is that when a woman has had a C-section, very often she has a substantial amount of drugs on board, which can impact those first feeds and those first moments of bonding. There is an absolutely wonderful growing level of awareness around the kind of care that babies require post C-section. So kangaroo care is something that is about having skin-to-skin contact. Sometimes it's with the other parent, sometimes it's with whoever is available for that immediately post-birth, if not the mother. But then they use it with preemie babies, so premature babies and so on. But skin-to-skin contact on the chest, wrapped. And the person who's holding the baby, their body temperature regulates and to the baby's temperature, and there's this whole beautiful bonding thing that goes on there, heart to heart. So there is a lot of changes. I even know of cesarean lotus births where they keep the placenta intact and take the baby and the placenta out together. But I am presuming that question came perhaps because of your own birth. And yeah, it can definitely be a clue to early longings that were perhaps not met because of the structures around cesarean section, like the drugs on board, the mother's recovery. So, yeah. So I hope that answers in some way for you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And beautiful to hear the different aspects and the different elements. I love what you said about it can actually be an imprint of safety, of like, I needed help and I was helped, and therefore I am safe, I am held. And I just really appreciate that, because it's such a common thing to be extreme about anything, to be, well, this is either all good or all bad. And actually there's so much nuance and so much in between. And I just really appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah. I just want to note and give a little bit of airtime to the fact that this information can be really touching, and it can touch some tender places for people that are listening. And so if that is happening for you, I want you to give yourself lots of love and care. And you can actually physically do that by giving yourself a little hug. Maybe you need to put your hands on your belly or your chest. Maybe the good old forehead and back of the neck with a few deep breaths. Contemplating your own entry to life and how it may be impacting you and how it may have impacted you your whole life can be kind of a big thing. It lands differently for different people, but it can be kind of huge. So I just wanted to acknowledge that for people listening.
I so appreciate that. That's a beautiful reminder and invitation and acknowledgement of the sensitivity and tenderness of these spaces, and of this space in particular, how we came in or how we bring our children through all these things that we're all navigating. So thank you for that. And actually just another practical question, which is I'm obviously going to share your links in the show notes, but any projects or anything in particular that you're kind of active on right now that you really think you'd love people to know about or to send out there for them to connect with?
Yeah. At the moment, so it's February already, and I have a really big workshop happening in July, late July. That's kind of what I'm working towards at the moment, is our annual deep immersion retreat, which is 8 days of experiential process work all around early life experiences. It's absolutely amazing, life-changing experience. Then we have an integration day, and then we go on to do a further 8 days to train to be a facilitator of this work. And that's in South Germany this year. So that's amazing. My big project at the moment, is working towards that gathering. And I only do one big workshop like that per year. This year, if we get the go-ahead, we've submitted to do a UN-funded project that will be another 10 days, but that is very unusual. Normally, I just do one a year, and it's just such an incredible experience, because we don't leave the venue. We just kind of we're there doing our processes day in, day out, lunch, dinner, breakfast, all being completely taken care of for us. And there's a beautiful warm swimming pool, so I like to use water for integration. Yeah, when I said we don't leave the venue, we sometimes go to the forest for a little walk, but we don't go to town or anything. So it's it's pretty amazing.
Context. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it sounds so beautiful. I mean, when Carly and I watched the documentary, that time ago, we were looking at how could we go and do this thing. It just was not practical from South Africa for us at that time. And now we're going to have a baby. So we'll probably come to you when we're ready to process whatever we need to process a few years down the line. And thank you again so much. I really only have one more question for you, which is, when you hear "we are already free," what comes up for you?
Yes, we are.
Easy. Thank you. Well, it's been such a pleasure, Nicole, truly so inspirational. I can really get a sense of the depth and breadth of the knowledge and the real transformational capacity that this work brings. And I know we've really only scratched the surface, but that so suggests for anyone listening to take it further. But I just want to say thank you again. I'm going to throw you into the green room again in a moment, and we'll go with an outro. But I just, thank you. Deeply appreciate you being here. It means everything.
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful chat, and it would be remiss of me not to mention the creatrix and founder of this work, Elena Tanetti Vladimirova. She is the woman who is on the film Birth as We Know It. She made that film on an absolute shoestring of a budget, and it's changed the lives of millions of people and births, and all of this work is her brainchild. And of course, it draws from many different sources. And she was involved with the Black Sea birth camps with Igor Tchaikovsky back in the day. And it's her body of work. And I'm so blessed to be carrying it forward. And it is life-changing. And I'm very blessed to have this now as my life's work.
Oh, it's beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you again, and I'll speak with you in just a moment. But thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
Beautiful people. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the We Are Already Free podcast. And like I said before, this really only scratches the surface of such an important topic. I really encourage you to go and visit the links in the show notes and empower yourself with your own birth story, how that's shaped your own life. Perhaps you're a parent and you want to process that as well and support your children in processing that. But understanding these birth prints, the portal through which we enter this life is so critical. And I'm sure that you feel that in the same way that I do after listening to this episode. So please do check out the show notes. I don't really have anything else to say today. This has been phenomenal. It's been such an honor and a pleasure. And I wish us all liberated limbic systems, that our nervous systems can expand and grow into the fullest expressions of ourselves so that we may be in service to the transformation of the world, which is also the work that Nicole does. So please do check her out as well if you're looking for support in expanding into your purpose as well. So it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for being here. I will see you again very soon. And as always, please remember, we are already free.